Hello and welcome. I'm Anita D'Amico, the CEO of Code DX, and today I'll be moderating a timely and important panel on securing elections in the post-pandemic world. We've assembled a diverse group of experts from federal and state government and from the commercial sector to address election security issues, how to manage them, and how COVID-19 has accelerated the conversation about web-based voting. Joining us today are the Honorable Alex Padilla, who is the California Secretary of State. Also joining us is Mr. Matt Masterson, who is a Senior Cybersecurity Advisor at the Department of Homeland Security. Also joining us is Mr. Bryon Bort, who is the founder and CEO of the cybersecurity company SCYTHE. Welcome to our distinguished panel. So let's get started. The United States 2020 presidential election will occur soon, and over 100 million Americans will vote using a variety of methods, with or without an auditable trail. The pandemic is causing part of that electorate to cast votes using different forms that they may not have traditionally used, and Americans have questions about the security of that process. So today's panel of election security experts will answer several of those questions. For example, we're going to talk about how did bad actors try to affect the 2016 election, and what lessons have we learned from that we're applying in 2020. We'll also discuss what are the security issues that exist in traditional voting systems that will be used in 2020. We'll also discuss the key responsibilities of the federal and state governments in election security. We'll discuss some of the security issues that exist with the new mobile voting platforms and how they can be addressed. And finally, we'll discuss what can be done to instill confidence in the election process in 2020. I'd like to start with a question about what we've learned from past experiences. I'd like to address this to Matt Masterson. Can you recap some of the various ways that bad actors have interfered with prior elections?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Thank you. So what we know from 2016 is that in this case, the Russian government targeted really three buckets that we think about. The first is infrastructure targeting. We know that they targeted in a small number of cases, gained access to voter data. For instance, the Illinois State Board of Elections voter registration data was accessed and taken. No evidence of changing of any records, but we know that was a point of interest for them. The second was targeting of campaigns and campaign infrastructure, emails and otherwise. The famous example being John Podesta's email to either get communication or critical information from the campaigns. And then there's the disinformation in and around both the election process and the campaigning candidates. So those are the three buckets we know from 2016. But what we also know is one, that the same playbook is not likely to be used again in 2016, that we're in a different environment. Two, as evidence from the recent statement from the Director of National Intelligence last week, there are more actors that are taking notice in what happened in 2016 and trying to engage with our elections and at least spread disinformation or doubt about the process. And then three, we continue to see just through our visibility into election networks, cyber criminals targeting election infrastructure, or at least county and state government, and having an impact on election infrastructure. And so as we look back at sort of 2016 and what's happened since, what we've learned is that we can't assume the same playbook and that we really need to focus on those resilience measures which enable election officials not just to protect those systems, but maintain the integrity of the process and keep it running throughout.
Thank you very much. Bryon, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so I represent the offensive security research side, aka the hacker. And the first thing I really like to highlight here is you don't have to technically compromise a system or a device to compromise it. Particularly when we're looking at election security, it's a question around public trust and transparency. And that responsibility of showing that trust and that transparency goes all the way from the different levels of government, the manufacturers, and everything that's operating the whole piece of it. And so if we look at elements of what we saw in 2016, the Russians compromised our trust in those elements. And the governments all throughout in the last 4 years have done an outstanding job of really rising to meet that challenge. I think it's also worth noting that if we looked at how the campaign happened over the summer of 2016, there was a moment there where the Russians actually got caught and there was a strategic pause. They stopped doing what they were doing. And I think it's worth noting that because that pause was their fear of what would happen with being caught. And when nothing happened, they continued to do it again. Since then, of course, we have seen a much more robust response at all levels in 2018 and 2020, which is why I would like to highlight what Matt Masterson said about that there is going to be something different. And I think the two things that we've seen is we talked about criminal groups. Well, that ties to the increase in ransomware that we see, as well as what we see as the rise of proxy attack groups, which is that countries like Iran and Russia have hired other countries or other groups to actually do the offensive operations on their behalf.
It makes it harder to trace back.
Exactly.
Right. Secretary Padilla, I know there are lots of lessons learned from those prior experiences. What's being done in California that's different since 2016? What lessons have you applied?
Oh, where do we begin? I mean, I think for starters, it's keeping Matt Masterson on my speed dial in case we hear or suspect anything. We're looping in our partners in real time so that we have as complete a picture of a cyber threat as possible and take any necessary action. But using the 2016 experience as a guide, and frankly, a little bit of the Mueller report and the indictments prior to that, as Matt mentioned, you can kind of categorize what was happening in 2016 in a few buckets. And I'll kind of use his buckets as examples. When it comes to the political campaigns and other organizations that are involved in around an election, our job on the government side is simply the elections administration side. We don't provide extra support for political candidates or political parties, but to the extent that there's incidents there that erodes the public trust, to Bryson's point, we do have to be concerned about that. So I think the good news is there's a lot better awareness today of the threats and some of the dynamics than there was in 2016, just more broadly, in all sectors, not just elections. When it comes to our infrastructure, I like to think California is leading the way. We have established our own testing and certification requirements for voting systems in California that exceed what's recommended by the EAC that most states follow. Things like requiring paper ballots, of course, and keeping your machines offline. But whether it's the code that supports systems, the firewall encryption levels, et cetera, I think California is on the forefront because we have, thanks to the governor and the legislature, invested in upgrading or replacing the voting systems in all 58 counties to newer, more secure systems. But I do think the biggest threat or concern for me today is the misinformation and disinformation that persists out there, not just, but especially on social media. I think my personal opinion, I'm not going to put this on other panelists, but the lack of sufficient response, I'll be diplomatic at that, to 2016 has served as an invitation, not just for agents of the Russian government to continue, potentially others, and even domestic actors who either get thrills off of creating that chaos or sowing doubt in our elections. So it's up the ante for elections officials to correct the record when we need to and inform voters of where they should go for official, reliable, trustworthy information on voter registration or actually voting. And that's, of course, your county elections office and the Secretary of State.
Well, thank you very much. Matt, it sounds like the states are relying very heavily on the Department of Homeland Security. What's being done differently at the federal level now versus 2016?
Yeah, absolutely. So much. And Secretary Padilla really touched on it. But in 2016, 2017, we're in an environment where we didn't have the trust of the states. I mean, there was literally states accusing the Department of Homeland Security of attempting to hack them, right? So that's the trust deficit we were at. And so it was incumbent on us to build a relationship with them and to meaningfully provide value. It's one thing to talk and engage with state and local election officials, but they demand more. They demand accountability, they demand support services. And so that's where our focus has been. Secretary Padilla mentioned having me on speed dial. It works both ways. I know I can reach out to him, or his colleagues can reach out to me across all 50 states. We have relationships with all of them, thousands of local election jurisdictions, providing information, providing support and services, everything from pen testing to cyber hygiene scans to incident response, ensuring that they have the information they need, whether it's general risk information, whether it's trend analysis on what we're seeing out in the field where election officials can improve, or whether it's specific technical threat indicators. That's getting out through our information sharing and analysis center to them in timely fashion so that they can defend their systems, and most importantly, take that next step, talk to their voters about the steps they've taken to protect the systems, about the steps they've taken to manage the risk and ensure resilience in the elections process. Because in the end, as Bryson so correctly pointed out, it doesn't take someone actually accessing the system to raise doubts, to raise concerns, and election officials are the ones best positioned to talk to their voters directly about everything they've done and the good work that's happened over the last 3 years to protect systems. There's still improvements to be made. There's still a lot to do in the lead up to this election, but there's so much that's gone on. The other area I'll highlight is the level of collaboration and coordination across the federal government. For DHS, CISA, for FBI, for DOD, for the intelligence community as a whole, this is a top priority. And what we see is the amount of collaboration, the amount of information sharing, the willingness of the intelligence community to downgrade classified information, to get it out to state and local officials is really working in this space. And it's a level that I'm told by many is unlike what they've seen in other areas of mission. I think we could still improve really getting stuff unclassified completely and shared broadly, not just with election officials, but the American public. But there's been a lot of good work done there, and that support is directly towards our state and local partners like Secretary Padilla.
It does build a lot of confidence to know that at the federal level that the organizations are really collaborating with each other. That's so important. And it sounds like there's some excellent information sharing going on between the federal and the state levels. Matt, you talked about that kind of information sharing. Do you find that the states are all using that type of information sharing, or are some using it more than others?
Yeah, I mean, each state's postured differently. We have gotten great feedback on what we're pushing. I think we continue to look for ways to improve to make it actionable, particularly for your mid to small county level officials. The reality is we have our 50 states and 5 territories, but we have over 8,800 local jurisdictions that run elections in this country. In a state like Wisconsin, you have 1,800 localities responsible for running elections just in Wisconsin. And so how do we make this information digestible and usable so that they can take it and say, okay, this is what it means for my systems. This is the steps I need to take. And I will tell you, this is the biggest area of focus for us right now. And I know for state officials, how do we get IT support down to the local level, those mid to small counties, the majority of which run elections in this country. Not everyone's Los Angeles County, right? The largest jurisdiction in this country. How do we help Cheryl in Jackson County, Ohio, understand what's being sent to her, how to patch a system, how to segment a network, how to implement multi-factor authentication? That's the challenge in front of us still. To help provide that support. And the states are doing really tremendous work. Many states have implemented cyber navigator programs where they're sending state IT officials out into the counties to help do this kind of assessment. But there's a lot more we could be doing. And this has been a big focus for us at CISA. We've reached over 5,000 jurisdictions with what we call our last mile effort to get them that base level information of the steps they can take to really manage risk and build resilience.
And if I could just expand on that a little bit, because Matt's painted the picture of what happens at the federal level and when the feds contact a state elections official, or maybe even a local. I can tell you that similarly, we work with a lot of other state partners. In California, it's the National Guard, California Highway Patrol, our state Office of Homeland Security, and other partners. Similarly sharing information and expertise, and just as the federal government reaches out to states, I, as Secretary of State, have a constant dialogue and partnership with each of the 58 counties in California that are in turn looping in their county government counterparts, whether it's on the public safety side, on the IT side, et cetera. So it's really that collective coordination, communication, and collaboration that is key here. And in California, we even invited the public to be a part of it. We launched a Vote Sure initiative in 2018 modeled after what we learned in 2016. In addition to responding to erroneous information that we may find online and providing official, reliable information proactively, we've set up a portal where voters can email us directly if they come across either suspicious or what they know is frankly just bad information about elections and an opportunity to vote. We do a quick review. We've established protocols with the Facebooks, Twitters, Instagrams of the world to bring wrong posts and content to their attention. It's been such a good partnership. About 98% of what we bring to their attention is pretty promptly taken down for violating the standards of that social media platform. So the public has a role to play as well in terms of being aware. If they see something, say something. We've heard that before, not just at the airport. It's worked well in elections, and we're going to have to keep that awareness level up for the next couple of months.
Well, thanks very much. It's very encouraging to know that that type of communication is going on. I'd like to turn our attention now towards some of the more traditional voting processes. There are ways of interfering with those voting processes. Bryson, I was wondering if you could address what are the different ways of compromising those traditional processes, ranging from voter registration all the way through counting of the ballots.
Yeah, just quickly following on what Alex said, I want to highlight the joint agency panel that Matt and I were on at DEF CON, because one of the big things that we highlighted, which he just said, is each of the agencies noted how you could contact them to see something, say something. And then we published that after DEF CON. So that was one of the big things that came out as the question to all of the hackers at that conference was, well, how do I get involved? And I think that also then ties in with we're all American citizens, and American citizens are the ones who can volunteer and be a part of these polling stations and these things. So where I'm trying to lead that is, particularly here at OWASP, right? This is also a technical conference.
Yes.
And even though that it's going to be in October and we're recording it just a little bit in advance, I think there's still that same call to action for everybody in this conference that has something very unique to add. Because when I look at the biggest risk area that I see, it goes to, and I'm not picking on Cheryl in Ohio that Matt called out, but it's that there are all of these staff who are working with antiquated systems. They don't necessarily know what the gold standard is for defense and doing those things, let alone the equipment and the complexity that follows with it. And that's really a challenge because the number one attack surface, if I'm ever going to go after any target anywhere for anything ever, is phishing. Why do I like phishing? I like phishing because, one, it's a game of statistics. So there are a lot of folks, particularly, I'm sure there are a lot of folks in this audience who are going to be like, well, I'm a sophisticated technical user. I would never fall for a phish.
Right.
That's simply not true, right? I have worked offensive research for over 20 years. I come out of the military and intelligence world where I was actually targeted for various things, and I still am not confident with my elevated knowledge and awareness that I wouldn't fall for a phish. It can happen to anybody because they're so hard to see all of the time. They're meant to look that way. But the real thing is the game of statistics. It costs me just as much to send one phish as it does to send 10 million phish. So I'm just going to keep playing the numbers there. And then you basically, it's like when you invite the vampire in and the garlic no longer works. It's the same thing with getting hacked. Once you click that phish, they're in the system. So at this point, it's kind of a question of, right, this would be where I would love to throw, kind of a high level generic diagram of all the systems in play of an election system architecture. But fundamentally, it starts with voter registration that goes into poll books. Poll books have have increasingly become more electronic, because that's my way to be able to match voter to registration in real time. And things are always changing, right? Is that a provisional ballot? Have you moved? What can I do to make sure that we can capture your vote? Then we have the actual system itself, the voting machine, that's going to be capturing the votes. And then the various levels from local to state level management systems. I do want to note that for the audience that aren't familiar with this, you notice I didn't say anything about federal. As Alex and Matt have been talking about, this is all managed at the local and state level. So as wonderful or not wonderful as you think the feds or DHS is or isn't, this really comes down to Alex and his team down below him and all of those volunteers that you can be a part of to understand and improve those issues with surface area. Something else that Alex mentioned is he was talking about how we like to make sure our systems are offline. So people in critical infrastructure are very aware of the concept of an air gap. An air gap is where you can't just access my computer easily, whatever that device is, easily from the internet, because of course the internet allows the attack space to be anywhere. I can be in any country anywhere, and as long as I have IP, I can get to it. The challenge is that air gaps are never 100% air gaps. At some point, they have to connect to something. Because if something sits over there in isolation, it's hard for me to get to it. So how do I get to it? What's the maintenance around that? Who are the people that are all a part of that? That's going to be a part of my targeting when I look at how do I get to the stuff that's of interest. Keep in mind what we've all been saying about disinformation in the narrative. I never actually have to accomplish anything across that. I just have to give the illusion that you're not 100% confident that I didn't. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest risk that I see. And I want to throw another compliment to a lot of the work that's been done between Fed and the state level, that a great majority of the networks that are actually doing these systems are monitored now. And that's a relatively new thing. And why I think that's important is going back to that narrative. If something happens, we have the ability to detect it, whether that's mail-in ballots, whether that's voter fraud, whether that's somebody actually trying to manipulate a system, whether that's somebody trying to manipulate a system that just displays the results. And the fundamental, real part is still there. Because if I can change what looks like election results on that night, then that's going to create chaos when the next day you have to go back and say, well, actually, no, that wasn't the case. So our ability to detect that is key. And then that final piece is, that's the element where I know the question wasn't really about mail-in ballots, but I think that considering the increased amount of risk on that narrative, mail-in ballots inherently take longer to count. And so folks who are used to staying up late into the night and having a winner declared in whatever election, that is most likely not going to be the case here. And that's something that could stretch for 1 to 2 to 3 weeks. And that is an opportunity for us to lose control of that narrative, even though the doing exactly what it should be doing with integrity.
That's a huge point, Bryce. And if I can, California's kind of developed a reputation for being notoriously slow to finish counting ballots in prior election cycles. I think for starters, frankly, we have a heck of a lot more voters in California than most other states. So it's surely a function of volume. But yeah, the process for verifying signatures and all those sorts of things that help maintain the integrity of vote by mail, I think will be exacerbated this election because so many other states are ramping up and expanding vote by mail, maybe for the first time or more significantly than they have in a long time. So, in California, every election night, we have a pretty good sense of where most contests are headed in terms of results. But for close contests and for final numbers, it is going to take a couple of weeks. And so, when I mentioned earlier, we got to be vigilant and aware for the next couple of months. That includes post-election, because if the race is too close to call in a handful of states, let's say, for purposes of example, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, Arizona, et cetera, then we may not know who the winner is the day after or the day after that. And that creates that space for lies and conspiracy theories and all those sorts of things. So we have a work cut out for us to set expectations now with the public and the press of what election night may be like and may not be like. One of the tools, speaking of vote by mail, that we're expanding statewide in California. A couple of counties have had it in the past, but statewide, we launched a program called Where's My Ballot? And any voter can subscribe to receive text message alerts, email alerts, or automated phone alerts on the status of their ballot as it's working its way through the Postal Service, both on the way to the voter and on the way back to the county, with the final alert being the confirmation that your ballot was received and counted. It's great for transparency, great for accountability, and great for the peace of mind that we've been talking about so much that voters deserve to have in the process. And look, with the recent chatter about the Postal Service and their resources or rule changing, we just created a dashboard for ourselves to identify any bottlenecks or delays in real time to be able to take action on them, working in partnership with Postal Service representatives at the regional and local level.
So much of this sounds like it's focused on making sure that the electorate has the confidence, even if everything goes right, if the electorate doesn't feel as though everything has gone right.
And then even when things go wrong, there's backstops to those, whether it's the ability to get a replacement ballot if you made a mistake on one or what have you. If you missed a deadline, things like same-day registration. People who need to vote in person for whatever reason. It's not a vote by mail only election. And if things really go haywire, you always have a chance to cast a provisional ballot. Will take longer to verify and count, but it will be counted. So people deserve to feel good about participation.
Mm-hmm. So that brings me to the topic of auditing the election. And can you speak, Secretary Padilla or Matt, can you speak to the importance of the audit trail and what techniques are used to audit votes?
Right, so I'll lead and then invite Matt to chime in with more of a national picture. But most states do have some level of post-election audit requirement. In California, every county is required to conduct a post-election audit after every election. So we spoke earlier about the testing and certification requirements for voting systems, keeping them offline as part of that. In California, paper ballots and a voter verifiable paper audit trail, not just so that when we count, we're counting paper ballots. When we need to recount, we recount paper ballots. And when it comes to auditing, we're auditing paper ballots. For most recent California history, it's been a matter of taking a 1% manual tally, right, making sure that the hand count matches up with the machine count to ensure the accuracy of the results. We're one of the handful of states moving from that simple 1% policy to more of a risk limiting audit model, right? More a sophisticated methodology that should result in a higher degree of confidence in the outcome of the results. Again, both important for accuracy and integrity of the results.
Yeah, just to build off what Secretary Padilla said, this has been a huge area of focus for us at DHS. We've been talking about it since 2017. That resilience, that ability to have an auditable paper record is really, really critical for exactly the reason Secretary Padilla lays out. Even if nothing's happened to any of the systems, if there's concerns raised, you have to have that ability to go back and check and recheck. And election officials have put a lot of time into this. What we've seen since 2016 to 2020 as a market increase in the use of systems that provide that auditable paper record. We're in the mid 80%. In 2016, we're going to be up over 92% or so of votes cast having that auditable paper record in this upcoming election. And what that means is that the vast majority of votes can in fact be audited after the election. Now we have to take that next step, right? And Secretary Padilla hit on it exactly. We have to audit those records. We have to have a process in place. The majority of states do. And now it's a question of how do we improve the efficiency and effectiveness of that audits. At CISA, we put our money where our mouth is on this. We've invested in the development of an open source post-election audit tool that many states are using, either piloting or using statewide in order to help support those efficient, effective audits, those risk limiting audits that folks are looking to do. So I really think this is an area of great improvement since 2016, but an area that's going to get much better because auditing is now part of what election officials do. And now it's just a matter of finding out the best ways to do it to offer the most transparency and the most confidence that your vote was counted as cast.
I just wanted to jump. Can I jump in real quick? Because both of them mentioned risk limited auditing, but I have a feeling our audience, one, doesn't quite know what that means, and two, is technically savvy enough to appreciate it. So where Alex was talking about shifting from a simple 1% to a risk limited audit, what they do is they take a sample of the results to look to see if there's anything that is statistically significant that would call in the results into question. And if there is, you keep increasing the sample size all the way going to 100%, of course, is the possibility. But the idea is that we're using mathematics and statistics to draw a conclusive result that we can back up based on the overall population of the ballots.
Well, thanks very much for that clarification. Appreciate that, Bryson. Since we are talking to the OWASP audience and web application security is very important to them. I thought we should talk a little bit about the Votes mobile voting platform. Bryson, can you describe that system and the pros and cons of it?
Sure. So Votes spelled with a Z. So Votes is a blockchain-enabled mobile app that has been used in elections in West Virginia, Oregon, Utah, and some smaller runoffs in municipals and Colorado. So first, I would like to point out that, whether we like it or not, the future is always coming. I don't want to draw the line of all of the potential for risk and the immaturity. I think that's the fair way to phrase it. The immaturity where the platform is now versus where it could go. So first, let's look at Estonia. Estonia has established a tradition of online voting to the point where every one of their citizens, not that there are a lot of them, I mean, California is like how many multiples of Estonia, but they have managed, considering who's on their doorstep and the amount of friction that they've had in their process, to establish a fairly robust system where voters can use any computer on the internet to be able to vote. Part of why they're able to do that is they have a very robust digital identification infrastructure. We don't have that. So that's the problem. And why that's important is because mobile phones are inherently insecure. No matter how awesome you are as an application developer, your application still has to run on this device, and you don't know what else has access on that device to do anything. This is what I always tell everybody when people are like, well, how do you hack something? Aren't you worried about encryption? I'm like, no, I don't. I never attack encryption directly. I just wait for your device to decrypt it, and then I take the information. And it's the same kind of problem that you would have with like a mobile app. My friends over at Trail of Bits, a New York City-based hacking company, they did a study on the Votes platform, and they found numerous issues with how it was implemented. But like I said, I don't want to cast doubt on it from that result. I think that the platform needs a lot of work, but I think it is something that could someday be of interest tied into things like the bill that's pending in Congress, looking at how we can establish digital identification. Because if we can do that, we now have the ability to confidently know electronically who somebody is. And then that solves a lot of the problems where you working in a platform that might not be secure, I could still have the confidence to know what happened or who did it.
Yeah. If I could just offer a much more low-tech comment on this discussion, because I get it all the time. When are we going to be able to vote online, or when can I cast my vote through the internet, et cetera? There's a key distinction between the act of voting and a ton of the other transactions that we have quickly gotten used to doing online, whether it's gaming or banking or paying parking tickets or whatever. The difference being we have a secret ballot in America, right? The privacy of our vote is critical. From day one in our democracy to try to guard against bribery and coercion and those sorts of things. So while we can't tell who votes, we can't tell who voted for who on their ballot. And obviously the architecture of the internet has failed to provide the guarantee of that privacy and secrecy. So until those measures are in place on a more broad and proven basis, elections should be one of the last things to migrate to being done online.
Yeah, so can I just real quick jump on that, because that actually ties back to a panel that I had with the CEO and founder of Votes a few months ago, and he drew the corollary. He was like, well, financial infrastructure already is using a lot of these same processes. We're like, yeah, but the error rate of that is 1 to 5%. And that is an unacceptable error rate when we're talking about our election infrastructure.
Right.
So,
if somebody hacks your credit card, you can contest that with your bank and resolve it after the fact. Not so much when election results are declared and people are sworn into office.
Yeah, the other part of this is that election officials have recognized this risk and have found creative ways to cut down some of the time. A lot of times when we talk about mobile delivery of ballots or even email of ballots, we're talking about serving military and overseas voters because there are real challenges there. Secretary Padilla and his staff could certainly speak to that. And so what election officials have done is found, and frankly, now federal law captures, you could do online ballot delivery and still receive that physical record back, right? And we know CISA did a risk assessment around online ballot delivery, marking, and return. There are ways to manage the risk around online ballot delivery, online marking. Online return right now, from a securities perspective, for exactly the reasons that Bryson and Secretary Padilla laid out, just can't be done securely with the level of confidence that we need to run elections. But there are ways to serve voters and election officials, whether it's that online ballot delivery and return, the tracking systems that Secretary Padilla has mentioned, just offering more time for folks to be able to return ballots. There are ways to do this and really make sure that folks are empowered without taking on that heightened risk that online ballot return really has. And so from our perspective at CISA, we know there's a need to serve these voters. It's important, and I think election officials have really found the sweet spot between security and access in offering things like online ballot delivery and marking without needing to take that further step of online return. We're just not there yet. But as Bryson said, technology will evolve, over time.
Well, I'd like to ask each of you, so let's look forward a bit. By 2024, can we have online voting, web-based applications for voting? Do you think it's possible to have by 2024, and what would have to be done?
I mean, I don't see it. I think there's still too much that needs to be done and proven before we introduce that into the act of voting itself. But I want to be precise, right? If you think of our democracy as a flowchart, I think there's a lot of room for technology to improve the voter experience, from the registration side to the education side to, even bifurcating, the ballot process, as Matt mentioned. It's, first half is delivery from the county to the voter. The other part is the voter sort of casting their vote. And then there's, of course, tabulation, audits, reporting of results, et cetera. So if you look at that whole spectrum of activity, I think there's plenty of room for technology to improve on how we're doing things. But when it comes to the casting of your vote, not right now, not soon.
Yeah, I'll give a really untechnical answer that Bryson can fill in the technical. The reality is elections are evolutionary, not revolutionary in many ways. Fast changes are generally not recommended. The change technologically that would need to take place to do it securely, we're not there. I mean, there's general consensus across the entire security community about that the architecture isn't there. Folks like Matt Blaze have suggested you need to reconfigure the internet itself in some ways to tackle this. And so 2024 is, for many election officials, right around the corner when you think about systems and process and implementation. We may get there, but I wouldn't make any predictions about the next presidential election in that way.
But I'll give you an example of another use of technology that we've deployed to, again, add security and improve public confidence. A lot of us may be familiar if there's suspicious activity on your credit card, your bank attempts to reach you to verify, hey, is this really you? And you can confirm that, whether it's through a phone call or increasingly you get an email, right? Was this really you? So we built that capacity into our voter registration systems, right? Voting and its infrastructure is one thing. Our voter registration database is another. A lot of states allow for online voter registration or updating of your voter registration record. So in California now, we confirm changes to a voter registration record to a voter at their email address. And if they change that on file, we'll send it to both the new and the old. So a voter who now gets an email saying, thank you for updating your registration record, it's either confirmation of something that they just did, or if it wasn't them, they know to contact the county immediately so we can rectify that situation.
Bryson, you have an opinion about 2024?
All right, so I bet and clean up here. I don't think we're going to see any significant changes by 2024. Matt captured that really well. There's going to be evolutionary, not revolutionary. And there are so many missing components of confidentiality, the privacy, the assurance of integrity. And then we haven't talked about it a whole lot, but availability of these systems. Again, the second easiest attack that I can do, short of getting you to click on an email, is sending enough traffic to flood and overwhelm your services that something goes down. And those are very hard to come back from, right? The denial of service attack. I think the problem is the same. So I did an interview with CNN a year and a half ago, and they were asking me about deep fakes. They're like, oh, well, how's the world going to, solve the deep fake problem? And I was like, I don't think there's anything to solve. Whether a deep fake is real or not, however realistic it looks, you have three kinds of people. You have people who are going to believe it because they want to believe it. You have people who aren't going to believe it because they don't want to believe it. And then you're going to have that middle ground that potentially can be swayed by the idea. And so I think that the biggest thing that has pulled as the narrative throughout this panel is, again, it's all around transparency, trust, and communication. We need the intelligence community to be sharing information and declassifying information more readily with the public. That information needs to be shared more freely for operational reasons to the state and to the local level. From a technology perspective, I'm not really worried about the technology. The entire combination of local, state, and federal governments have rallied and really brought together a combined and amazing response across this country that makes me feel comfortable as a citizen participating in it. I'm still worried about all of my fellow citizens and the disinformation that is both domestic and foreign that continues to erode our belief and trust in our own democracy and its process.
Thank you. Well, we're running out of time. I'd like to finish up with what would you like to talk about in terms of election security? What are the challenges, or what advice do you have that we haven't discussed today? And also, I'd like to borrow something that was done during the DEF CON election security panel that Matt and Bryson were on. And that was if there's some place that you would like the audience to know that they can contact with him for information or to report something. So I'll like to hear what we haven't discussed that you'd like to talk about and where you think people can get more information or report something. Secretary Padilla?
Sure. For California residents and California voters, one-stop shop at vote.ca.gov for registration options, for verifying your registration status, for poll worker information, cybersecurity information, the whole gamut, all in one location. So I think if there's one area that we haven't touched on, and it's not high tech by any means, it's kind of make a plan for voters who may be worried about whether it's, if I vote by mail, what's the security of it, or impacts of the postal service, or if I vote in person, what's the security of it? How do I stay safe during COVID? All those sorts of things. We're working diligently at the state and at the local level to provide multiple options to vote and vote safely, and we're going to safeguard that ballot and the vote counting process. But it is not as beneficial for public confidence if voters aren't aware. They need to be aware of their options, and they need to be aware of what to do. So, as I mentioned earlier, in California, we're sending a mail-in ballot to every active registered voter in California prior to the election. So we want to make sure they're anticipating that ballot in their mailbox, their option to track the ballot, both coming and going, the in-person options for voters who need it. And so the more we do to educate voters and encourage them to make a plan, hopefully they vote early. I don't think there's too many people waiting till the day before the election to decide how to vote on this one. And I'm not just talking about the top of the ticket. I'm talking up and down the ballot. So if you vote by mail, send that ballot in early if you can. If you're going to vote in person and they offer early voting in your jurisdiction, vote early if you can. And know to direct the questions and seek answers from those official, reliable sources of information at your county elections office and the Secretary of State.
Thank you. Bryson, would you like to address this?
Sure. So I talked about a call out for help. The University of Chicago put forth something called the Election Cyber Surge, which are inviting other IT professionals to come in and help the local folks who need help with just the technology side. At the citizen level, I mean, volunteering and being a poll worker, getting involved and being a part of that process is an element. I'll let Matt talk to the contacts that he's got for CISA and EISAC. I will tell what FBI said was there's fbi.gov/tips as their website, or you can write to CyWatch, CYWatch@fbi.gov, or the Election Assistance Commission with security@eac.gov for contact points.
Thank you. And Matt?
Yeah, just completely agree with both Bryson and Secretary Padilla. Secretary Padilla touched on one part of what we're looking for voters to do or be heading into this election, and that's prepared. Having a plan, understanding your options. Am I registered? What's on my ballot? What's my plan to engage with the process? The second is being patient. Understanding it takes time to get you a ballot. It can take time to return a ballot. If you show up in person with physical distancing going on, you may have a line, but having that plan, being ready to engage the process, and then being a voter that participates. And Bryson nailed it. We need poll workers. We need election workers across this country, 250,000 or more nationwide before November. And so the ability for someone to serve as a poll worker that's healthy, that feels safe, is really critical to serving our other citizens. The best part about it, particularly for this community, is if you have questions or concerns about the security of the process, there's no better way to learn about the process, the resilience that's built into it, than to serve as an election worker. And so if you go to helpamericavote.gov, it's run by the Election Assistance Commission. That's a site you can go to get signed up as an election worker and really help serve your fellow citizens to be a participating voter. If you can't do that, if you don't feel safe, there's so many other ways to participate. You can watch pre-election testing of voting systems across the states. You can engage directly with your state and local election officials to have your questions answered. This is why we run elections at the state and local level, because those who run the process are part of your community. They're fellow soccer moms or dads with you. They serve on your church boards with you. Ask them, get engaged with them, understand the process in your state. That's what creates a prepared, a patient, and a participating voter. That's what we're going to need heading into this. If you have any cybersecurity concerns or anything to share with CISA, simply send it to central, CENTRAL, at CISA.dhs.gov. We take that in. We can get out to all 50 states and thousands of local jurisdictions if you have vulnerabilities. If you identify a vulnerability in a state or local system, start by reporting directly to them, though. They're the ones that know their systems. They're the ones that could best remediate the issue. If you're not having success there, CISA stands ready to help you. We do it all the time, and we're ready to serve.
Well, thank you very much. On behalf of OWASP, I'd like to thank each one of you for your participation today and for a very informative panel. Thank you very much.